like they don't ask you questions like where do you see yourself and all that, right? It's a very, very simple, and like I think this is the difference I've seen when it comes to like companies like Uber, Fang, and some thoughtful startups, right? Where that like the HR person or the people person, you say from day one they're approaching it saying that they want to help you sort of move through the funnel, right?
Right.
So they do a quick conversation. They say, "Hey, Ankit, that's great. What have you done? Here is what the role is about. Here's sort of like the high level expectations on the role." And then and like obviously they're trying to just get like some high level feedback on whether you'll be a good fit or not, right? Without being explicit about it, right? And then I think from then on they'll do that conversation, and like it's almost they're not a gating criteria, right? At least in my case, they were not.
Right.
And then they were they were actually preparing me, saying, Ankit, hey, mostly if you meet, you should be meeting this person X next, right? This is what they've done at Uber. This is what they care about, like a very high level about the person and what mandate they have. Right. So they're very sort of coaching you in a process.
Right.
So, and they told me
so there is what. So your first is HR, right? I mean, you have a chat.
HR, right? Yeah. And then in my case, like it was with the head of marketing.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
We just hired.
After that, the head of marketing came into place.
Yeah. So
and then did he give he or she give a technical round, or how did that work?
Yeah. So I met the head of marketing. They asked me a bunch of questions, and they were largely from an aspiration standpoint.
Okay. Right? Non-technical, like what is outbound clicks, what is inbound clicks?
No. Right. And like so they didn't ask me anything of that sort. They did like sort of ask me to talk about my accomplishments, right? Which is again obviously they had the resume, but they wanted to hear accomplishments specifically. And what they ended up doing is they obviously they would have seen something, right?
Right.
They asked me, why do I want to be at Uber, right? I think that became a very important question. And the good thing in my case was I was genuinely passionate about the product, right? Like I didn't apply because I wanted more money or equity or anything, right? I genuinely just loved the product. So I think that sell was good. And post that, I think they again coached me through it, right? They were like, you know what, Ankit, you talked about these 3 accomplishments first and these 2 at the last. You should probably switch the order, right? So again, like I think the nuance with Uber, and I think they will still hold true, is once you're in the funnel, right? Like once they've said, hey, we want to talk to you, I think they're very clear that like they want to enable you versus trying to say, do I want to eliminate you, right? So even with the head of marketing, it was saying, hey, Ankit, this is great, but in your next interview, it will be with this person, right? And who was the head of business at that time, right? And they said this is actually they like Sanjay was head of marketing and he looked at all things brand, and then there was this person who was supposed to be the head of they used to look at all things digital, right? So they said this is the person you're going to meet. They're super technical, super nuanced, right? So be very, very prepared, right? And at that point, he also said, hey, Ankit, here are 2 questions I would love for you to answer, right? As a take home.
Right.
So these were like not your random golf ball questions. They were like real business problem statements saying, hey, how does Uber do this? Right? If they had to, and they wanted me to respond to that, right?
Got it.
So that's sort of the first round. And then second round was with this head of business, which was extremely, extremely technical, right? But it was not about
which term technical?
Yeah, which was all things about like digital and business, right? It was not about CTR or CBR or anything of that sort, right? It was about things like how do you optimize this, right? Where here is this point in the funnel where we see this drop off, right? And then they said do a qualitative and quantitative assumption scenario analysis to say how do you solve it, right?
And everything is live, right? Everything is live. Like it's not a case study that is assigned and told you.
No, it is very I mean it's a business problem, but very digital, like sort of digital. Again, not very performance marketing, no channel business, right?
They're just trying to like to understand your business understanding, problem solving skills
as it applies to like some of the digital solutions, right? So that was sort of a conversation, 45 1-hour conversation, pretty intimidating if you ask me. And it was also not digital only, right? I was thrown like curveballs, like saying, how do you measure offline media and its impact on business, right? So that's sort of the interview that happened. And then that also came with like 1 or 2 take-home questions, right? So they said, hey, Ankit, this was great. I would love for you to do a slightly bigger deep dive on this one and come back, right? And I'm like, cool. So like these questions are now building up every round, right? So that's how it was happening. I essentially finished these 4 questions, right? because the HR reached out and said, hey, Ankit, can you submit them by XYZ date? And I'm like, okay, cool. I did that. And then I got another call, which is saying, hey, we might have to schedule one more interview. Right. And this was with head of Uber Eats. We had just started Uber Eats in India. Right. And internally, they figured out that they needed somebody strong on Uber Eats. So that's why that person, sort of the head of Uber Eats business, also came and had a chat.
Right.
Again, we did a bunch of business, sort of how do you grow this? How do you grow that? Right. And then they also had to follow up questions, right? So essentially, I have this 6 sort of big sort of problem statements that I had to now attack. And once that was done, HR reached out, said, Ankit will have like sort of a bar raiser or a community round, right? So Uber had this thing called a bar raiser, which is somebody who's not responsible or not even related to what your role would be, right? Okay. But they're there to just ensure that Uber is hiring the best candidates ever, right? Okay. So they used to be called bar raisers, and these questions were again sort of not coming from my domain, but largely around culture fit and how do you attack this problem, how do you solve this.
And right? generally, who takes the bar raiser round, and who took your bar raiser round?
So it was this person who was in the ops team.
Okay,
right? He was an ops person, fairly senior person, right? And the way bar raisers work is like once you're an employee, Uber sort of has this program where you can actually sign up as a bar raiser.
Okay.
So within the employee group, you can say, I want to be a bar raiser, and then like you get chosen based on the role that is getting hired, right? Like for example, like from a level perspective. So for me, because it was the head of acquisitions role, they were mostly sort of senior folks who ran like P&Ls. But like if I were taking somebody, like if I was hiring for my team, right? Somebody for probably who's an ops manager, right? Would end up being a bar raiser, right? So that bar raiser round happened, and then the last one was essentially the presentation, right? Which was all the things I had prepared, and all my people who had I interviewed, right? They were in the same room,
right?
So they could essentially do back and forth and saying, why did you think of that, and why did you not think of that, and all that.
How many people were there in the room?
I mean, there were 3 people, and I think 1 people from the SF office because it was a global role, right?
That must have been a stress interview.
No, but I think, to be honest, right, I think by that point I had become like
friends with them,
super okay with the process, right? Then it was like, and the other thing is that these people were intimidating in the interviews, right? But you walked out and saying they're there to actually sort of enable you and saying, hey, this is like they're selling the job equally to you versus saying, hey, you want this job, right?
Correct.
Which is, I think, the nuance that was different and made it to a point where I was saying, hey, this could be a great place, right?